What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 556. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line all the way from Denver, Colorado, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. Luis, how you doing, man?
Doing pretty well. You know, it's very hot here, but I guess that's better than the alternative. And I don't know. I think time's passing, or at least so they say. Yeah,
it's been passing a little quicker for me this week. I actually took a very long kind of road trip drive on Monday and just came back last night. So I've kind of been out of the loop a little bit. But yeah, you know, it's interesting because with COVID stuff going on, this type of stuff isn't really a thing. You know, I haven't done this. But if you do plan everything out and make sure that, you know, you kind of know exactly how things are going to go and, you know, you're limiting your interactions and stuff, you can make it work kind of. And I got to say, I didn't really feel like driving. I drove down to California, you know, and from Seattle here where I live, it's like 13 hours or so. But it did feel nice to do something that wasn't the same thing that I've been doing for, you know, 4 or 5 months. So
yeah, you went down there for that Smash Mouth concert I saw, right?
Yeah. I went down there for a heavily crowded, you know, rally or whatever. Yeah, no, I did get to see my friend Woody, who's been on the podcast before for a little
Woody's
bit.
Awesome.
Yeah, so that was great. And, but you know, for the most part, I was just in the car driving by myself. And, even that though, which you wouldn't think would be, you know, something great, still, you know, kind of had an effect on me, in a positive way, I think. Anyway, but I'm back and I'm, happy to jump into the show. We're going to be talking Amonkhet Remastered here. They have, released sort of a morphed version of Amonkhet, an Hour of Devastation on Arena. And, well, we're going to go over it today and kind of give you the lowdown on what's going on with Amonkhet Remastered and how to play it. Before we do, though, let's talk about our sponsor, channelfireball.com. First things first, we mentioned it last week, but if you use the affiliate code LR when you buy anything from there, well, that's great. We really appreciate it because what it does is it shows CFB that you came from here, and it's a way to support the show as well. So thank you to everybody who does that. And going forward, we'll remind you to do it as well. It's just all you have to do is just type in LR. And then one of the other cool things, it actually just came up in conversation with our producer Jeff here while we were getting started on the show, Luis. You box them, we buy them. Dude, this is like seriously, this is like one of the most convenient things I've seen. I actually thought you were joking when you first said this to me. And then when you told me it was real, I was like, this is amazing.
Yeah, if you go to channelfireball.com/uboxwebuy, all one word, it outlines it. But it's really very simple. All you do is you put all the cards you want to sell in a box, you fill out the form, and then you send it to us. And that's it. We'll make you an offer. And if you don't like it, we'll send the cards back. So it takes away a lot of the hassle of buy listing, where instead of looking through to make sure every single card is you know, exactly where you want it to be, yeah, you can just throw all the stuff you know you don't want in a box and then see what it turns up.
Yeah, you know, and I think that especially if your collection's gotten away from you a little bit, where you have so many cards and, you know, and it gets overwhelming, right? Because the truth of the matter is that if you do want to sell cards, you know, you're trying to be kind of like efficient about it. And so, you know, you want to make sure that they're in the condition that you hope they are, and you're checking the prices on everything. But there also comes a time where you're just like, I don't want these in my life anymore, but I also don't want to spend 12 hours, you know, figuring it all out, right? Like going through all the trouble and stuff. And I'll tell you what, I would pay somebody, you know, I would just be like, here, you take care of this. And if I can just send it to CFB now, that is a huge convenience. I think that's really cool. And then, like you said, you know, there's not a big downside, because if you're not comfortable with the offer, you can just turn it down and then get them back. So yeah, channelfireball.com/uboxwebuy. If you've got a whole bunch of cards that are taking up space and you just want them out of your life, that is where you should go. Of course, the show is also brought to you by you via the Patreon. That's right. Patreon.com/limited resources to support the show directly. That's still, you know, your number one way that if you want to support this podcast, if you want to keep it going, if you like what we do here, that's the place to go. Patreon.com/limited resources.
You say that's the number one way, but
it is. Yes.
Have you considered having fans, send orders of pizza to your house. That would, I think, be the actual way to
So the only problem is that doesn't scale particularly well. You get 12 large pizzas in one day or something. It's like, what am I going to do with all this?
Well, I have some ideas, but
all right. So the second best way to support the show, patreon.com/limited resources. And of course, you get a bunch of cool little benefits too. And one of them is you can submit questions for our Q&A episodes that we do, or if we have guests. And then I'll also pull from those for the Patreon question of the week. This one comes from Andreas Müller. I'm assuming that he's from Germany. Hi, guys. I absolutely love your podcast and can't wait for the episode each week. Thanks, Andreas. I'm really happy you've been able to reignite your love of the game after a low end last year. Now my question. When watching streams, I recognize that the pros usually hold back their cards at a point in time when I would have dumped my hand to try to steamroll my opponent. Can you share some thoughts on how to improve my gameplay? Thanks for all you do, Blue Undy. Thank you, Andreas. This is something that I think every player goes through, Luis. I certainly had this exact same thing happen after I started watching high-level Magic, where I had been playing at my local shop and on Magic Online. But when I kind of discovered the Pro Tour and when the coverage was starting to ramp up for it, I started to watch more. And then I started watching like your videos and, some of the other video producers that were going. And I had the exact same experience as Andreas here, where I was like, oh, you drew that, you play it. And the person would be like, go. And I would be like, but it was just a creature. Like, don't you just want it on the battlefield or whatever, right? And I would always have to try to reverse engineer why the players were doing that. And sometimes it was obscure, but this is something that I think occurs to most players at some point during their progression. Do you have any broad strokes advice for this? I mean, we've talked about like when to hold removal and stuff, but this is kind of a bigger topic than that.
Yeah. So that process of player development, you go from playing around nothing often to playing around too much. Because I guarantee you, if you watch, like, let's say a ton of Ben's matches, Ben Stark, you'll be able to spot some matches where like, wow, he didn't play that. I would have played that. Or wow, I would have held that back, and he just lays out his whole hand. What it really shows as these players are playing is that they know what the range of possibilities are from the opponent. That's always an important thing to keep in mind. It's actually a good question leading into Amonkhet Remastered, because as a friend of the show and Constructed Resources co-host BK said in the lead up to the show when we were just kind of hanging out, there's 8 different Wrath. There's 8 different sweepers in this set. There's actual Wrath of God, Hour of Revelation, Anger of the Gods, Sweltering Suns, et cetera, Rags to Riches, just a ton of stuff, right? Mm-hmm. So knowing when to hold something is going to be really important in this format. And broad strokes, knowing what they could have is important. So in this format, if your opponent's playing white or red, they have a lot of options at their disposal. And then what are you going to do about that? Well, one is don't commit things if you don't need to. When your opponent's at 1 and you have 3 creatures in play, well, I think most people understand why you don't need to put a 4th creature into play there, right? Mm-hmm. And then, but the funny thing is, though, if you're playing against a green deck and they could have a Hornet Queen, let's say you saw one in the previous game.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
A lot of pros will be like, well, you need to play your 6th creature actually to kill them if they play Hornet Queen.
Right.
The other thing is, are they playing in a way that's suspicious? If I play against someone, let's say it's game 1. Actually, game 1's even better because this Amonkhet Remastered is only best of 1 when it comes to draft.
Right.
You don't know what's in their deck. But if they're playing if a white deck and they go no 2-drop, no 3-drop, and I have 2 creatures on the board, I will think about not playing a 3rd creature at that point. And I'll kind of look and say like, well, Wrath is a rare. I don't know they have it, but how many times let's say they're on the draw, how many times on the draw are you keeping a hand that doesn't have a play until turn 4?
Yeah, it's never, ever.
Not very much.
Right.
So if I have a good 2-drop and a good 3-drop, hopefully I'll have something to do on my turn 4 that isn't play a creature. That makes the decision really easy. Let's say you have a card draw spell or something. But even if you didn't, I would be very inclined to just not play a creature for a turn. And then if they play a creature next turn, then you can just resume. But next turn, if they Wrath, well, you ended up saving yourself a valuable 4-drop. So there's no real easy answer to this, but the way you can break it down is know what they could have and what the possibility space is, and then make your decisions based on that, and then factor in how they're playing. If you're playing against a red-white deck, a very aggressive color combination, and they played nothing the first 3 turns of the game, it's just so much more likely they have a sweeper than not. given that information. Obviously, they might still not have a sweeper, but the chances have gone up quite a bit.
That's right. Yeah, and I think to zoom that your point out even one step further is that if you watch Ben play, the reason he's doing the thing that he's doing is that he's thought about it and he's applying that to what he's seen from his opponent and what he knows that he has in his deck and or hand. That's deliberate. Right? Like that's you actually making a decision to say, I am not going to play this creature rather than just sort of guessing. Because a lot of the time, what you'll recognize is, a really good example I saw a really long time ago. I think I was watching Sam Black play maybe, and he had a pretty well developed board, and so did his opponent. They were at a standstill, and he drew, a 3-mana 2/2 with some minor ability, and he just passed the turn back. And I remember thinking, well, what is he doing? Like, he should just play it. Like, what's the problem here, right? But that's where your reverse engineering can really come into play. Perhaps Sam had a sweeper in his deck, and he thought to himself, well, if I draw it, I want to play it, and then I want to have something to play afterwards, right? And this 2/2 for 3 is never going to actually affect this game as the board sits because it can't get in for damage my opponent's at 16 life or whatever. On the same tip, it could be the opposite, where Sam goes, well, this is game 3, and I've already seen the sweeper that my opponent has. So putting out a creature onto the battlefield that is extremely unlikely to affect the game in any way is frivolous, and I'll just keep it in my hand. And then you can kind of build out from there. That's only under the sweeper paradigm. There's also cards like we've had in recent sets where they're looters, right? Where you'll want to keep a redundant card in hand in case you draw a loot effect or one that has you discard a card as part of the cost. And a 2/2 for 3 that isn't affecting the board or doing anything, I think most, entry-level, mid-level players would just be like, I guess I'll just play it. But perhaps, there's a thrill of possibility in the deck for Sam Black there. And he says, I'm just going to hold on to this junker that I don't need anyway. And I might draw a thrill of possibility. They are thinking about things on that level where it's like, it could be one card in the set that you haven't even seen from your opponent. But if it's free to play around or extremely unlikely to get punished by it, then they'll do it. So, for you, Andy, I think you can tell that this is obviously a much deeper topic than the kind of thing that can be answered in like a guideline or a sentence. But the thing that you should be aware of is being deliberate, right? Is doing these things for a reason, even if the reason ends up being something like that's a huge long shot, like them, playing around a mythic that you haven't seen from them yet. If it's free to do so, if it really doesn't cost you, you should probably be doing it. Okay. We may have to go deeper on that topic at another time, just because it is such a deep pool of knowledge there. But this episode of the show is about Amonkhet Remastered, so let's get into that. First things first, Luis. Amonkhet Remastered reminds me. Remember when they did this with Shards Block?
Tempest.
Oh yeah, maybe they did.
They did Tempest Remastered on Magic Online. They also did the Shards Block full packs. Yep. That happened as well.
Yeah, where basically they've gone back and they've said, okay, here was a limited format that had a bunch of relevant cards in it and whatever, and we want you to be able to play it again, but we don't want to release it exactly how it was before. And that's what they've done here. They've taken Amonkhet and Hour of Devastation, and they've merged them together into one set, basically called Amonkhet Remastered. And then they've also added in a bunch of cards that, they remind me of Masters style sets where it's like sort of seeded constructed cards, I guess is how I'd put it, like cards that they wanted to have on Arena for Historic or whatever. And so now this is a way that they can kind of get another sub pool of cards in there. And as a result, they've released it as basically a set for us to draft. And that's how the cards are going to go down to Arena.
Yeah, it's 303 cards. So they cut cards from both sets and then added those 14 kind of like non-Amonkhet Hour reprints, some of which are kind of bizarre, but we'll get to those. One of the things we're going to do today is just do a review of all those cards for Limited because they were never in this format before. But before we get to that, let's chat about what Amonkhet and Hour of Devastation kind of were like. Triple Amonkhet was really aggressive. You had cartouches, exert creatures. All the one drops were good. This was the Slitherblade deck, red-white aggro with all a bunch of Gust Walkers and red cartouches and whatnot. So kind of just super blazing fast format. It actually slowed down quite a bit once we added Hour of Devastation. And another funny thing, especially for newer listeners or newer Magic players, old set formats used to go triple of one set, then the new set will get added, and you're now two of that set, two of the old set plus one of the new set. So it went from Amonkhet to Amonkhet Hour. And that's just kind of how old formats used to be. And especially if there's a third set, then it would go Amonkhet Hour plus whatever the third set is. This block didn't have one. They actually have moved away from that starting a couple years ago. And, you know, I think that was a positive change. The formats tended to get worse the more sets got added because they had all these conflicting themes.
That's right.
So, but that is what these look like. Now, of course, in Amonkhet Remastered, we're just seeing all 3 packs of the same set, which I think is superior. Yeah. So once Hour of Devastation cards got added to the format did slow down quite a bit. You had these like 5-color ramp decks with like Oasis Ritualist and Gift of Paradise, which actually wasn't reprinted here, I don't think. And then quite a few better incentives to play slower or decks with more expensive cards. And then you also had, you know, fewer of the really aggressive exert creatures, though exert did exist. And there was like deserts and cycling was another theme, which again helped slow the format down. So the format ended up not that dissimilar to most formats. It had good aggressive decks, and some were really, really good and fast. And you know, that was maybe a little bit even outside the bounds of what a normal deck was. But there was also plenty of decks that weren't trying to be down at all. Yeah,
it's funny. Not that this like sums up the whole entire format, but when I think of Amonkhet, the card I think of is Gustwalker, which is 1 and a white 2/2, and it has exert, so you can exert it when it attacks. If you do, it gets +1/+1 and flying until end of turn, but then it doesn't untap the next turn. So 3/3 flyer for 2 mana when it hits you. And that was kind of what you felt. The other cards, which you briefly mentioned that I think about with it, are the cartouches, which were auras that augmented your creature and gave you a bonus. So again, exert plus cartouche is like the board when you said go, it could look a lot different by the time combat was happening. Like the creature's bigger because it's exerted and you're getting cartouched, and a lot of times the cartouche would give card advantage or affect the board. After Hour of Devastation came out, the card I think of is River Hoopu, which is the blue-green 1/3 flyer with the activated ability 3 blue-green, you gain 2 life and draw a card. So like, yeah, these are so different, right? And again, they don't necessarily represent their format, but what came to mind for me, a gold card with a 5 mana activated ability versus freaking Gustwalker hitting you for 3 on turn 3 or whatever. So that kind of sums up that it really was like a massive change after Hour came out. Now, what would be reasonable expectations for if you mash these together? Well, they has a significant number of Hour of Devastation cards in it, so the reasonable expectation would be that it plays closer to Hour than it does to original Amonkhet.
Yeah, so I do think we're going to see a deck with plenty of aggressive cards. Like those still exist, but there's also the room to play these multicolor high-end decks as well. So it's going to be a mix. And I think that, I mean, I haven't drafted the set yet, so I don't know exactly where on the line that'll fall, but I'm hoping there's a good mix because that would make the most sense. That's the best experience, I think, overall. It
was also a good format. With Hour in, it was good. With Amonkhet, just straight up, it got a little one note, but Hour Devastation Limited had, you know, you could do different things and it ended up being pretty well balanced. I remember feeling for the first time in a really long time, like the second set came in and kind of saved it rather than diluted it a little bit and made it weird. Instead, it was like, oh, this is actually just a good set now, you know?
Yeah, I agree. I really like the Amonkhet Hour kind of combination.
Okay. So, how do you want to do the big picture stuff? Do you want to go over to the commons? Do you want to talk about the new cards? Where do you want to start?
So I think we can start by just reviewing the new cards and then move on to kind of the top 5 commons and what each color is looking to do. I think that's going to be a good breakdown. Okay. Actually, let's do that first and let's do the new cards after that. And I just changed my mind. Okay. I think that it'll make more sense to kind of set the table before getting into the individual cards in general.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking too, but you know, I made the mistake of trusting you. So
yeah, well, all right. So starting with white. White is the white and red are the 2 most aggressive colors, and in fact, you know, one of the best white decks is red-white aggro. Another really aggressive white deck is black-white zombies. Yeah, you know, it's got seeded. There's a bunch of zombie payoffs. It was kind of cool. There was like a tribal theme, but not a like massive tribal theme. Not even every color had too much in the way of tribal, but black-white zombies in particular stood out. There's, you know, uncommon Lord of the Accursed. There's a bunch of good common aggressive zombies, you know, things like Binding Mummy. Whenever you play another zombie, tap one of your opponent's creatures.
Yeah, there's a signpost uncommon Wayward Servant, which was in Amonkhet at uncommon and made it over here as well.
Yeah, that's the black-white 2/3 that or 2/2. Whenever a zombie enters the battlefield, you drain your opponent for 1.
That's right.
So,
what did you used to call that? Didn't you have some name? Wayward or Wayfaring Servant? I can't remember. You always got the name wrong on that. I can't remember.
I don't know, but it sounds like your error, not mine. And then lesser drafted decks were blue-white flyers, which could come together, but didn't really. That wasn't a strong theme. You know, They had some gold uncommons that were good for that, but it wasn't something you ended up in a lot of the time. And then green-white beats because green had some good exert creatures. So in general, white's aggressive. It just doesn't stray too far from that. You could see it as part of a control deck as like not a splash, but like a support color more. But because there was a passivism and a tapper. But for the most part, if you're drafting white, you're attacking. And the top 5 white commons, I think Compulsory Rest is better than Gustwalker in this format, though I liked Gustwalker more in Triple Amonkhet. Compulsory Rest is a 1 and a white. Enchanted creature can't attack or block. And then it actually gives the opponent an upside where they can pay 2 mana and sack the creature to gain 2 life. But it is still a pretty good, cheap way to remove your opponent's creatures. And then the Gustwalker, which you talked about, still a great card. Fanbearer was the 3rd best white common, also very good. This is white for a 1/2 and has 2 tap target creature, and it's a zombie.
Yep.
So it's just the exact kind of card to trigger your zombies matter stuff. Also, just in an aggressive deck, tappers can be really, really good. And then you have Oketra's Avenger kind of tied with Binding Mummy so Binding Mummy is the 2 mana 2/2 that whenever a zombie enters the battlefield under your control, you can tap, well, actually an artifact or creature. I don't know why the artifact part was there, but that is going to be better in zombie decks because Oketra's Avenger is the 2 mana 3/1 and you can exert it when it attacks, which means it doesn't untap the next turn, like you mentioned on Gustwalker. And when you do, you prevent all damage that'd be dealt to it. So it's a 3/1 that can attack kind of invulnerable, which is actually very similar to cards we've seen multiple times over the years, right? Seasoned Hallowblade being the latest.
Yep.
In a strong zombie deck, Binding Mummy is better. It's actually better than Fanbearer. It's actually maybe the best common, but early on, you're probably better off taking something like Oketra's Avenger just to be safer. And then Aven of Enduring Hope was pretty strong. 5 mana 3/3 flyer when enters the battlefield, gain 3. This is more of the control side of white, where a white-green deck could be playing multiple of these as a way to kind of ramp into, with kind of the flip side of that being the aggressive white flyer is a Tawcrop Elite 4 mana 2/2 flyer, but you can exert it when it attacks, and if you do, all your creatures get +1/+1 this turn, including it.
Yeah, that thing hit the hammer. Yeah, that was often the end of a game.
Yeah. So if you're drafting white, you're just assume you're going to be heading towards an aggressive deck and kind of plan accordingly, though you don't always get there. I think white's probably like 80% aggressive, something like that, where like a fifth of the time you draft, you have white cards in your deck. You're not being an aggressive deck.
Yeah.
Blue, on the other hand, was more controlling, and that's going to be reflected in kind of how I've ranked the top 5 commons, where I put 2 controlling commons over, I think, what might be a better aggressive common, even like card quality wise, but just the blue decks just didn't end up that direction quite as often. The best blue deck in general was blue-green ramp, because blue-green ramp was able to really leverage green's good ramp and blue's good card draw, which kind of like in the history of Magic that has happened. In fact, look at Constructed over the last couple of years.
Right.
And then blue-black control / cycling was pretty good. There's some good cycling payoffs and good control payoffs. And then blue did have 2 aggressive decks. Blue-red kind of prowess / spells had some outs. There were some good reasons to do that, but you weren't going to get there that often. And then blue-white flyers, which again didn't always come up. Blue also played really nicely with deserts. The best blue common, Unquenchable Thirst, is 1 and a blue for an aura, and when it enters the battlefield, tap the enchanted creature if you have a desert in play or in your graveyard, and then the creature doesn't ever untap. So if you had a desert, this is a 2 mana, lock their thing down, claustrophobia, whatever you want to call it, capture strip for just 2 mana.
Right.
And even if you didn't, it was still pretty good. But it got better with deserts, and blue, being controlling, like cycling lands and cycling cards and all that stuff. So I think the blue commons, Unquenchable Thirst is the best, followed by Essence Scatter, 2 mana counter target creature spell, followed by Aerial Guide, which I again think is a more powerful card, but just didn't fit as well. This is 2 and a blue for a 2/2 flyer, and when it attacks, another attacking creature gets flying.
Yeah.
So
this just wasn't what you wanted to be doing, as it turned out here. But I mean, still the power level is enough.
White.
Right.
And if this card cost 2 and a white, it would be obscene.
It would. And I mean, it still holds its own enough, but it's like you'd rather be ramping on turn 3 or trying to get to bigger stuff. Because the thing that balanced a lot of this out was cycling, can really help you out if you have too much mana, because it allows you to include some of the more expensive cards that have cycling, and you can cast them later or cycle them early. That matters a lot. And then some of the cards that we'll talk about in green when we get there as well were naturally positioned defensively and also ramped you. And that is a really nice combo for limited, where you have like a really good, like a totally serviceable blocker, plus it's doing the other thing that you want to do. And blue is definitely the best complement for that.
Yeah. Cartouche of Knowledge, also kind of nice one, though this got a little worse coming out of Amonkhet. 1 and a blue, enchant, an aura. Enchanted creature has +1/+1 in flying, and when it enters the battlefield, you draw a card. It's actually the precursor to Rousing Reed. And a solid little card. It worked better in the more aggressive decks, which it was quite good in the prowess decks. You put this on like a Spellweaver Eternal, which is coincidentally the next blue common I want to talk about, and you could really get in there.
Yeah, it's free, right? I mean, as long as you found a window for Cartouche of Knowledge, it had a meaningful effect on the game and didn't cost you a card, and it was only 2 mana. Like, yeah, the floor
and it could be really, really good sometimes. Like,
yeah, I mean, sometimes it just won you the game. So yeah.
Also, one thing to mention, which did come up, is the trials. It's a cycle of uncommons, and one for each color, and it's an enchantment that has an effect when they enter the battlefield. And then if you play a cartouche, you get the trial back. So I remember actually you were actually covering this match. In a team sealed Grand Prix, I had 2 Trial of Ambition, which is 1 in a black enchantment. ETB, they sack a creature. And then I played Trial of Ambition, then played the blue cartouche, picked up both trials, and that's just
your opponent's looking at their
something
hand.
Like a 10 for 1.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember that. That was absurd. Yeah. So, anytime you can get the trials plus the cartouches going, it's good, and you should try to, because it's just really good card advantage. Yeah.
Yeah, and also just about all the trials were pretty much playable on their face as well.
Yep.
And then Spellweaver Eternal, this is for the prowess decks. This is 1 and a blue for a 2/1 prowess, and it has a flick 2. This was an aggressive mechanic where if it's blocked, your opponent loses 2 life. So when they're low life, this thing gets in no matter what. And even earlier, let's say they trade with a 2/2, they get punished for 2 life there too. So a very strong aggressive card. But in general, blue, I like to pairing it with black or green the most.
Same. And like I mentioned, like a card that doesn't crack the top list here, but like these are the type of cards you can get for that blue-green deck. Striped Riverwinder, 6 and a blue for a 5/5 hexproof, but it has cycling for blue. Right. And there's a green one that we'll talk about later, one of my favorites. But, these are the type of cards that you can put into a deck like blue-green, and if it's turn 1 and you don't have anything going, you just cycle the stupid thing. But if you top deck this later after you've ramped, boom, you're playing relevant spells late in the game.
Yeah. Black was very heavy on removal, as black tends to be, and it could kind of slot into both aggro or control. There's black-white zombies was a great aggressive deck. Red-black is kind of interesting, where you could definitely be an aggressive red-black deck with a low curve and using removal to clear the path. There's also slower black-red cycling decks that just use both black and red for removal and then win the game with cards like Wander in Death. This is a sorcery for 2 and a black, returns 2 target creatures from your graveyard to your hand, and has cycling.
Right.
So you could just go like 1 for 1, wander back my 2 things, one of which I probably even cycled into the graveyard, because cycling cards are very strong, like you mentioned, in control decks. And then blue-black control is also great. That had a more of a cycling theme. And then black-green was more of a ramp mid-range and kind of played around with like the -1/-1 counter theme that was floating around as well.
Yeah, and this is also typically black-green in that it's almost never just black and green. Like you will have enough fixing that you're splashing for something.
Right. The best black common is Splendid Agony, 2 and a black. It's an instant. You distribute 2 -1/-1 counters among 1 or 2 creatures. So basically you can give one creature 2 -1/-1 counters, or 2 different creatures -1/-1. And these are counters, they stick around. So what would often happen, you'd go like kill your 2/1 and make your 3/3 into a 2/2 permanently. You got a 1 for 1 and you permanently shrunk their other thing, or just kill your 3/2, what have you. It's pretty cheap, pretty flexible. Final reward is next, 4 and a black, instant, exile target creature. Just good, clean removal. Nothing really too spectacular. Yep. is not the kind of card you want in a mega aggressive format. We're seeing that in M21, right? We're finishing Blow, which is basically the same card, is just not that good. But it was good in this format, and I expect it to be good in Amonkhet Remastered.
Yeah, and I don't want to, go too far down the rabbit hole here, but one thing that did come up, and I'm sure will come up here as well, are the gods, the God Eternals or whatever they're called. The Scarab God, Scorpion God, those type of cards. We did have to, in a slower format, make sure that we prioritized exile or counters, like you mentioned, Essence Scatter for blue. Because of those, like there would be decks where you could be like, I have this card draw engine, I've got this long game plan, I've got 2 River Hoopus, like I'm not going to lose a long game. And they'd be like Scarab God, and you're like, can't ever win. I'm dead on the spot. And so that's why you'll see cards like Final Reward and Essence Scatter even notched up a little higher, because the format's slow enough to support them so that they're not embarrassing. And they are a few of the outs to the unbeatable mythics that you might face. And they are here in Amonkhet Remastered as well. So that little adjustment stays.
It is also relevant because Embalm is a theme, which is creatures that when they die, from the graveyard, you can pay a cost to kind of put a counter into play or a token into play that's them. So an example is Aven Initiate's 3 and a blue for a 3/2 flyer, and it has Embalm for 6 and a blue, which means after you trade it off, you can then pay 7 mana to put a 3/2 flying token into play. So Exile, of course, is good against those as well.
Definitely.
Black also has Lethal Sting, which takes a little work. It's a 2 and a black. It's a sorcery. As an additional cost, put a -1/-1 counter on a creature you control, destroy target creature. And the biggest drawback with this wasn't that the -1/-1 counter was so brutal on your creature. It's that you just couldn't cast it without a creature.
Right.
So you'd end up in some situations where you top deck this with no creatures in play, and it's really bad. But usually it's not that huge of a cost to make your 2/4 into a 1/3, because a 3 mana kill a creature, is pretty strong. I liked Cartouche of Ambition quite a bit as well. 2 and a black aura gives your creature +1/+1 and lifelink, which is pretty strong, and it puts a -1/-1 counter on their creature when it enters the battlefield. So what would often happen with this, and this obviously depends on your creature makeup, is you'd put this on a 4/4, kill a 2/1, and attack with a 5/5 lifelinker, and it'd be a pretty big swing. Yeah,
and this in triple Amonkhet was the best of the cartouches and one of the best commons, full stop. It was an absolute thrashing in an aggressive format. Definitely down on the list here, but still very powerful.
And then Horror of the Broken Lands rounds us out. And this is a very strong card as well. 4 and a black for a 4/4. It has cycling for just 1 black mana. So we've already seen from Ikoria how strong 1 mana cyclers are. You've cards like Memory Leak, which are kind of underwhelming on their face, being a good addition to any black deck. Well, Horror of the Broken Lands was that, except it's also just pretty great to cast. And it has the ability, whenever you cycle or discard another card, it gets +2/+1 until end of turn. So what would often happen with this card is you'd play it and you'd attack, and they couldn't really block with a 4/4 because you could just cycle 1 card.
Yeah.
And let's say they double blocked, because it got +2/+1, it often would take out both creatures. Also, you could just attack without having a cycling card, and they would often be too scared to block. So very strong card. It makes Wander and Death a lot better. You get just, when you draw this early, you just cycle it and you're going to get it back at some point.
Yep.
Black was a fairly decent color overall. It just had a lot of good options.
It was one of my favorites, mainly because of Final Reward and Cartouche of Ambition, because Cartouche is so good against aggro and Final Reward is so good against mid-ranger control. Like, you just need those type of answers.
Red was quite aggressive. Like I mentioned before, red-white aggro was great. Red-black removal, blue-red prowess. And then red-green, which we haven't talked about yet, was mostly aggressive. It was not quite red-green monsters, actually lower curve than a traditional red-green monsters deck, because there's just a lot of good red and green 2- and 3-drop aggressive creatures. We're going to talk about the green commons later, but there was an actual support for a red-green deck that focused on the 2 to 4 drop slot and then used removal and pump spells to kind of go over the top of bigger things.
Yeah, super straightforward. The signpost on common is Kenra Charioteer. It's 1 green-red for a 3/3 with trample that gives your other creatures trample. So
yeah,
right to the point.
Yep. The best red common, I think, was Magma Spray. It's really close. Open Fire. So Magma Spray is red for an instant, deal 2 to any creature. It doesn't hit players, but it also exiles creatures it hits. And then Open Fire is 2 and a red, instant, deal 3 to anything. I would tend towards Magma Spray initially, but I could easily see these swapping based on the format speed and what kind of creatures end up being important. That's the sort of thing that you kind of need to get into the weeds to really choose between. But both those cards are great.
They're both great.
Obviously good in control or aggro. And then Puncturing Blows a pretty big downgrade from that. That's the 2 red sorcery, deal 5 to a creature, and then exile a creature. So a pretty good removal spell. Again, it hits those gods you were worried about, but also just kills anything. 4 mana to kill anything is not so bad. That's quite a step up from 5.
Yep.
And then Kenra Scrapper is a nice one for aggressive decks. 2 and a red for a 2/3, and then when you exert it, it gets +2/+0 in menace. So what would often happen with Kenra Scrapper or other exert creatures, if you haven't played with them, is when the coast is clear, you just attack normally, right? Also Kenra Scrapper, it naturally has menace as well.
That's right.
You would just attack with it, and then you would exert it when you needed it to get past their blockers, whether it's because they had a good double block lined up, or in the case of Gustwalker, right? You'd play your 2 mana 2/2 on turn 2. If they didn't have a blocker on turn 3, you just hit them. If they had a blocker, you'd exert it. It wasn't actually that complicated to figure it out. There was some board situations that made it tricky. And then the last red common, I think, in the top 5 is kind of a tie between Thorned Moloch, which is 2 and a red, 2/2 prowess, and has first strike while attacking. Pretty strong in like the blue-red style of decks, or even in red-green if you had enough tricks, because this card was, had some threat of activation stuff going on where
quite a bit,
you attack a Thorn Moloch into a 3/3. If they block and you magma sprayed their 2/2, like that's just a huge disaster for them.
Right.
And then Thresher Lizard, which more decks wanted. It was 2 and a red for a 3/2, but it has +1/+2 as long as you have 1 or fewer cards in hand. This is the kind of card that it's just a 3 mana 4/4 in the mid to late game of the aggressive decks. A huge payoff for really curving out.
Yeah. Also, that also had some fun threat of activation stuff too, where you could attack with it as a 3/2, and you're like, might have an instant.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
And then green, I really like green once Hour was added.
I feel like green was the best color, maybe.
Well, it's because it had Oasis Ritualist, which I think is tied for kind of best green common.
Yeah.
And the Ritualist was obscene. So this is
awesome.
3 and a green for a 2/4, and it could tap for 1 mana of any color, or you could exert it and tap it to add 2 mana of any color to your mana pool instead. So it's a 3 mana 2/4 that taps for any color. That's a pretty good fixing card, ramp card, because it's a 2/4 blocker and then ramps you up to 5 or 6 if you've played a land. But the fact that you could exert it to add 2 mana of a color means you could get up to 7 for something like a Greater Sandworm on turn 5. You could also splash even double off color things I remember having decks with 3 Oasis Ritualists playing a Glorybringer off basically no other red sources.
You could, and it was a 2/4. Which is really big for a mana ramp creature, generally speaking, to the point that even if your opponent had one of those 2 red removal spells that we talked about, the Magma Spray and the Open Fire, a lot of times you'll find that the interaction is, do I want to let my opponent have access to the ramp and the fixing? I'll choose to use my cheap red burn spell to kill their mana creature. They can't even do that. They don't even have the choice to kill it here.
Yeah, so Oasis Ritualist. We'll talk about the top 5 commons right after I talk about the decks here. We got sidetracked by the Ritualist. It's too sweet.
Right. Yeah.
So blue-green X ramp, certainly one of the best green decks, as well as green-black kind of X mid-range / ramp. And then red-green beats, which we just talked about. And then green-white beats, which honestly, green-white beats didn't really come together unless you got exactly Appeal to Authority. This is a multicolored card, one of the Aftermath cards, where Appeal, the front half, is a sorcery for 1 green mana. It gives a creature +X and trample, or X the number of creatures you control. And then Authority you can cast from your graveyard. For 1 and a white, it's a sorcery that taps 2 creatures, and all your creatures gain vigilance. Yeah. So once you had you could easily get 2 of these because green-white wasn't a very drafted color pair. Your 18 creature deck with 2 Appeal to Authorities was insane.
It was.
You're pay 1, give a creature +5/+5, tap 2 of your creatures, kill you, or just cast Appeal on turn 4 to get a good attack in, and then later in the game, flashback Authority. They could never attack you because of it. It just sat in your graveyard threatening them. Yeah. But in general, when you start with green cards, I would expect you to be a kind of ramp deck, a multicolor ramp deck.
You said, blue-green was the best color combo.
Yeah, blue was the best support. So the best green common, I think, is kind of a tie between Cartouche of Strength, which is 2 and a green for an aura, gives a creature +1/+1 and trample. And then when it enters the battlefield, you may have it fight target creature an opponent controls. This was the one with the really bad templating that we've moved past. Yeah.
Where you don't get to choose until the person gets to wait and choose. Yeah, it's so brutal.
Right. So what you would do, and we actually even saw, I remember being in the booth for this. I think it was with you. I think it was Ben Stark, actually. played the cartouche, targeted their opponent's creature, they cast a pump spell and Ben binned his creature, not knowing he didn't have to fight.
That was it. I remember that.
I feel like we give Ben enough credit that we can kind of highlight his misplays too.
Yeah, sure.
But no, Cartouche's strength was very, very good. You needed a bunch of creatures, but the fact that it was a fight spell that left behind +1/+1 and trample was pretty strong.
For only 3 mana.
Yeah. The Oasis Ritualistic, which we talked about earlier, was just pretty hard to kind of avoid too. That card was just awesome.
Yeah.
Hoodie B, Hooded Brawler. Hoodie B is 2 and a green for a 3/2. It's a Snake Naga Warrior, and then when it attacks, you can exert it to give it +2/+2. So again, this is the card 3 mana 5/4.
Yes.
Like this is why Amonkhet was so fast. Obviously, a lot of the green decks being ramp decks means you didn't always end up with wanting Hoodie B, but the card is such a powerful card. I just played this in my ramp decks and it was still great.
Same.
It's just not a bad card at all.
Yeah, because the thing that didn't stand out, like I remember when we first looked at Amonkhet and it was like, oh, exert's really interesting. Like, do you exert? Do you not? Like, what's the board state like? And it turns out the incentives were so skewed towards exerting every time that it was just like 90%, it was just like exert. You were just, because a 3/2 on defense is kind of junk, but a 5/4 attacker for 3 mana is absurd. So you were just like, I'm going to build my deck to take advantage of the absurd scenario, not the crappy one. And that basically held true for all of the exert creatures, the ones that, because if you remember, most exert had to do with combat, power, toughness, combat benefits, stuff like that. It actually wasn't that many of them that were like the ritualist. It actually felt like a space that they didn't, fully explore yet, with the tapping and using exert as like a utility ability or whatever. But yeah, cards like Hooded Brawler, you'll find that people will just be exerting them basically every time, and you should plan accordingly.
Yeah, and it's funny. So a 5/4 over 2 turns, like a 5+0 is less than hitting for 3 and hitting for 3. Mm-hmm. But the key is the 3/2 doesn't get to attack past their 2/2s or 3/2s, but the 5/4 does.
Exactly.
So you did tend to exert this one fairly often, unless the coast was completely clear.
Yeah.
And then there's also Naga Vitalist, the 2 mana 1/1 that taps for any color your opponents or your lands could produce. So it doesn't add new colors, but it gives you doubles and triples and whatnot. Mostly it's just a 2 mana 1/2 ramp creature.
Yep.
Not a 1/1. And then Ronus is Stalwart. So green is kind of split personalities here with the best commons, which actually isn't overall a great thing for how consistent it is, because it doesn't really help your control decks to see 5th pick Ronus' Stalwarts. This is a 1 and a green 2/2, and then it can exert as it attacks. And if you do, it gets +1/+1 and can't be blocked by 2 power or less creatures this turn. So great in aggro decks, but this is not one I wanted in my ramp decks. Hoodie B was big enough that I would, but this wasn't good, except in like the red-green beats or white-green beats decks for the most part.
Yeah, I think honorable mention on this list is Greater Sandworm as well. Yeah, 5 green, 7/7 worm. And it can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less, which is really, right. Those are the creatures that end up blocking it for the most part. It either hits for 7 or it gets chumped, and this one just can't. And it has cycling too. And that is really powerful for these ramp decks, of which, green has a lot of ramp. As we noted, just in these top cards, there's 2 different ramp creatures. There's also a ramp spell at common as well. So you can get mana, no problem. And a card like Greater Sandworm just absolutely shines in those decks, because legit, when it hits the battlefield, it is a problem. Like 7/7 can't be chump blocked by small creatures is a major clock, and they don't want to have to start throwing their 4-drops in front of it just so that they don't die. That's a good way to lose a game of Magic too. And of course, the cycling comes in, when you don't draw your ramp spells and you're not getting to 7 mana anytime soon. This one fits this, style of format a lot better too.
Yeah, I would really say that Greater Sandworm's kind of tied with Stalwart, even Vitalist. Like they're kind of a scrum there. There's nothing besides, like, I think Cartouche and Ritualist stand head and shoulders above the rest of the green commons, and where you pick the rest kind of depends on where you're going.
Agreed. And by the way, please, Greatest Sandworm, don't disrespect him.
Oh, sorry, the greatest of Sandworms.
There you go.
So that's kind of what each color and all the color pairs are doing. One thing that's kind of cool is, they added these 14 rare and mythic cards kind of out of nowhere. I don't really know exactly the motivation. I mean, obviously it's to put them in historic,
right?
I mean, I don't know why we need Thoughtseized and historic, whatever. That's more of a constructed resources topic,
there
which
you go.
we actually did cover this.
Good.
So we've got some cards which weren't in the format before, and some of which are cards from quite a while ago. I think a lot of folks may not have played with these. So I wanted to do a quick review, not to quite the depth of a set review, but we'll say a few words about these cards. So there's basically 2 for each color plus 3 multis and an artifact. Wait, I guess red got 3. Okay, well, whatever. Who knows? So white has Wrath of God, 2 white, destroy all creatures. Also, they can't be regenerated, which is interesting because there's no regenerating creatures in the format. No. There we go.
They got rid of regeneration as a mechanic, so yeah.
This card's very strong. A 4-mana sweeper, just straight up, is a card I would be pretty happy to first pick and then look to draft a controlling deck.
Yeah. The only downside is that it's in white. Yeah. Yeah,
exactly. So, yeah, and it almost might be a giveaway where if I'm playing against what looks like a white-blue or white-green control deck, I'm just going to kind of think there's like a 20% chance they have Wrath. You know, like, why else would your white deck be controlling? There's a couple reasons, but this is one of the bigger ones. Next is Rest in Peace. 1 and a white. It's an enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, exile all graveyards. Then cards get exiled rather than go to graveyards. Yeah, this is not a card that's playable and limited. So don't play this card. Don't need to
worry about that one. Yep.
Wrath would get a letter grade A, Rest in Peace, and F.
Yep.
Blue gets Jace, Unraveler of Secrets. So this is one of those like kind of weird Jaces. I don't even remember which.
This is the Shadows over Innistrad. The 3 blue, 5 loyalty, +1 scry 1, draw a card, -2 bounce a creature to its owner's hand, -8 you get an emblem with them whenever opponent casts his or her first spell each turn. Counter that spell.
All right, so yeah, this is a fine card.
It's great.
5 mana, 5 loyalty, +1 scry 1, draw a card is going to be a really good card advantage mechanism. I'd be happy to first pick that.
That's all I need to see, to be honest.
Then minus 2 to bounce a creature when you start with 5 loyalty means you can go Jace, bounce your creature, next turn bounce your creature, and still have Jace in play. So I'm pretty happy taking Jace and drafting a control deck around this, though it would still be fine on like a red-blue prowess deck too. Yeah. Like this is just a good card.
Really good card.
I'd give Jace probably just an A. Yeah. Another really strong card.
I like an A for Jace, yeah.
Pact of Negation is next. This is a 0 mana instant counter target spell. Okay, well, there's got to be a catch. In fact, there is one. At the beginning of your next upkeep, pay 3 blue, or you lose the game. So one good thing about this being on Arena is you're not going to forget the Pact trigger. No, this was something that kind of plagued live play where it was just... Well, here, I'll give you a short genius or grifter. This happened at Grand Prix San Francisco 2007, and well, I knew this person who was playing with packs in their deck, playing against someone who had played a Pact of Negation. Or no, they played Summoner's Pact, which is the green one, where you search your library for a green creature and play it. So. But you have to pay 4 mana next upkeep. So their opponent played Summoner's Pact, got a Sliver Overlord. They were playing like a 5-color Slivers deck and played it. And then the I guess protagonist of the story took a really long time on their turn and then asked for a translation of Sliver Overlord because it was foreign, though they knew what it did. And they thought, and then they played a thing, and then they said, all right, well, go. And then the opponent untapped and drew. And they're like, yeah, you lose because you didn't pay for your pact.
Just stalling long enough to hope that they forget.
Well, it worked, so.
Yeah, that's pretty rough. I heard stories of people building contraptions to put over their library, like they sawed one of those hamster balls in half. So to like put a little dome over their entire library so that they could not draw the card until they paid for the pack.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair.
Yeah.
And then you have stories like Kenji Sumura, Hall of Famer, reminding their opponent, to play Pact, to pay for Pact. So, in any case, Pact of Negation is not a very good card in the sense that paying 5 mana to counter a spell isn't great, but the fact that it costs 0 means there are situations where this card can be a backbreaker. I mean, the traditional use for this, if you played with it in like Cube, for example, is you wind up your big drop, like let's say a Greatest Sandworm. You tap out for Greatest Sandworm, and then on their turn, when they try to kill it, you're like Pact, and then you've got a huge board presence. You're okay kind of skipping your next turn's worth of mana.
Right.
So I like this in proactive decks. I think like a red-blue prowess deck that has some good play, like good board presence plays and is pushing the aggression could use this. A blue-green control deck is a lot less likely to want to because you're going to be behind, and pacting something when you're behind is not a winning proposition.
Right, because the thing to remember is you can't choose to just pay the 5 mana. Like you can't just be like, it's your turn. I have 5 mana, pack your thing. Like you have to use 0 and then pay for it on your upkeep.
Yeah. So I would give this probably a C.
Yeah,
but
it's like a C minus or something.
It has its place.
Yeah. Speaking of packs.
Yeah, Demonic Pact. This is a nice one. This is a 2 black, and it's an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, choose one that hasn't been chosen. Demonic Pact deals 4 damage to any target, and you gain 4. Target opponent discards 2 cards. Draw 2 cards.
Nice.
Or you lose the game.
Womp.
So, if you take this as a spell, let's remove the lose the game aspect for just a second. 2 black at the beginning of your upkeep, nug something for 4, gain 4, then make them discard 2, or you draw 2, and then the reverse. That's an obscenely powerful card.
It's absurd.
Takes a turn to get going, but ends up being a 5-for-1, and you're getting 4 off the exchange. You're killing a creature with the 4 damage. You're up 4 cards on the draw 2, discard 2, and then you also even gain 4 life. So the question with Demonic Pact is, how are you going to get out of the last clause? How are you going to get out of the deal with the devil here? There's bounce, there's disenchants, and that's mostly it.
Well, you could do it the good old-fashioned way, just kill your opponent.
True. No, that is actually a good point. And an aggressive deck could say, like, all right, I've got 3 turns left to kill you.
Yeah.
I don't think this card's actually good in limited, but I also think that the card is really sweet. If I open this card, I could see myself taking it and trying to build around it. But in general, I don't think this is a card you're probably going to want to go for. This is a build around D, where it's not really good because most of the cards you'd have to play to combine with it aren't that good. Right. Like I don't really want to be playing main deck disenchants just to kill my own card.
Right. And if you draw this without it, you just can't play it. And if you draw the disenchant in your main and don't have the
draw
pack,
you 2 cards.
Yeah, no, you could gamble. If you were in desperation mode, you could do it. But I mean, if you just miss, you just lose the game.
5 cards.
Yeah, it's just so brutal to spew off the game. Like, all right, well, I lose.
Then there's Thoughtseize, which obviously is the most impactful card for Constructed.
Yep.
Black sorcery, they reveal their hand. You choose an online card and you lose 2 life, and they discard that card. It's honestly not that good in limited. Like
it's fine.
It's fine, but it's like a C plus. Like it's actually probably like a B minus. You'll always play this card because the fact that it hits anything, unlike Duress, which only hits non creatures, means you really aren't going to miss with this card all that often. You are trading a card into life for a card, and you spent 1 mana, they spent 0. But if you get to take their best card or what they're planning around, it's cheap enough that it can be good. So
yeah, and you know how limited goes. Yeah, I mean you can find bombs.
Myself up.
Yeah,
but it's not a card you have to really go after.
What about Anger of the Gods?
This is, I don't know why they added this. This set already had Swelter and Sons. I guess they really thought Historic needed it. It's 1 red sorcery. Anger of the Gods deals 3 damage to each creature, and if a creature would die this turn, exile it instead. So, yeah, it's good. It's worse than Sweltering Suns in limited because cycling is a pretty powerful effect. Yep. Sweltering Suns is the same card, but cycling 3, though it doesn't have the exile clause. I mean, I would say Anger is probably a B. It's still just a good card. Yeah. The biggest drawback to Anger is it's like Wrath of God. Red decks typically don't want this.
Exactly. That's the problem.
Kind of nice in the prowess decks. If you can cast a cheap spell, then cast Anger, your like 2/2 prowess has all survived this. Chandra Pyromaster is the next one. It's a really nice one. This is 2 red for a 4 loyalty Chandra. You can +1 it to nug a creature for 1 and its controller for 1, and then that creature can't block this turn. It also hits planeswalkers, but that's not super relevant. And then for 0, you can exile the top card of your library. You can play it this turn, which includes lands. This isn't one of the cast Chandras. And for -7, you can exile the top 10 cards of your library, choose an instant or sorcery card exiled this way, and copy it 3 times. So
and then cast those for free. Yeah,
that I mean, whatever. The ultimate's fine, but mostly it's a 4 mana planeswalker that you pay 0 to draw every turn, and then if they have 1 toughness creatures or you're aggressive and want to get by their creatures, the +1 ability is pretty good. So
yeah,
Chandra Pyromaster gets an A. It's just a classic good Chandra. It's a kind of forgettable Chandra. I didn't even remember this one when I looked at it.
Yeah, it's a core set Chandra, I think.
Yeah.
And then bizarrely, the third red card that we get here is Shatterstorm. 2 red sorcery, destroy all artifacts, but they cannot be regenerated. So
This is an old card, right?
From Antiquities, from one of the first sets.
Yeah. I can picture the art with the cup, the broken cup. Yeah.
Yep. The next one's a nice one that you don't really play it in limited all that often. Collected Company, card I've been casting a lot recently. 3 and a green for an instant. Look at the top 6 cards of your library. Put up to 2 creature cards with converted mana cost 3 or less, and put them on the battlefield. To put the rest on the bottom. So to really use Coco, you're gonna want probably something like 15 creatures that cost 3 or less, which is just not what most limited decks end up looking like.
Right.
And that's so. It's a build around B in the sense that it's very powerful if you hit 2 3-drops or a 3-drop and a 2-drop off it. If you hit 2 2-drops, it's not even that good. So
yeah, you're getting the instant speed part, which is kind of interesting. People like to argue that it's okay to play it because if you hit a 3-drop, you're getting it. Basically, you're adding a mana for flash. Like if you just hit 1 3-drop or whatever. And that's not a disaster. It's true to a point, but also sometimes even hitting 2 2-drops isn't the most amazing thing, and you have spent 4 mana for that. So
yeah, it's just okay. I'm not a big fan.
Yeah, same.
Limited. I am a big fan of the next one. This is a Hornet Queen. 4 green for a 2/2 insect. It has flying and death touch, and when it enters the battlefield, make 4 1/1 flying death touches.
This is one of the best limited cards ever. Like it's not really a limited card, but yeah.
6 power and toughness, but spread among 5 creatures, and they all have death touch
and flying.
If they don't have a sweeper, this trades for 5 creatures.
It's unbelievable. Like, seriously, I do believe this is one of the best limited cards ever because of its ability to play both sides, right? Like, if you're on defense, this shores up effectively any board that, outside of unblockable. And if you're at parity, you now have attackers that are extremely tough to deal with. And if you're ahead, it slams the door on the game in the same way by just putting a bunch of flyers in the air. It's amazing. Really. It's also triple green, which is a little tough, but it's in green. You know how we were complaining that Wrath of God and Anger of the Gods are in colors that you're not super stoked to have, like red and white sweepers? Well, green, it's the ramp color. So this is like the perfect card. All I really want to do is open a Hornet Queen in the set. It's just the nut. Yeah.
Yeah, Hornet Queen is awesome.
Yeah.
Lord of Extinction is one of the multicolors. It's 3 black green, and it's an XX for X number of cards in all graveyards.
I remember being very excited when this came out in Alara, whatever, back in the day, but it never really has done anything.
No, it's not. It's not been a card for Constructed, and then for Limited, it's good, but it's going to be a 5 mana like 5/5, and then at some point it becomes like a 20/20, right? It just gets bigger and bigger and bigger
as
the game goes on.
Yeah.
You're going to play this every time you're black-green because there's real no downside. I mean, it's a 5 mana spell. It's really rare that by the time you could cast this, there's no creatures or no cards in graveyards or very few cards. And this does grow over the course of the game pretty rapidly. You also don't have to cast this on turn 5. You can just play your other cards, then play this when it's already a 7/7.
Right.
So I do think it gets like a B+, but it's to some degree, once it gets big enough, it doesn't matter how big it is. Like, functionally, a 12/12 and a 20/20 are really not that different. Your opponent's going to be in chump or die mode. Damage-based removal can't kill it, but bounce and final judgments and stuff like that are all going to be great against it. And then the last card is there's two cards left. Sphinx's Revelation. It's white, blue, X, instant, draw X cards, gain X life. I like this card. This is a card that would push me into being a blue-white control deck because 7 mana, draw 4, gain 4 is pretty strong. But if you in a pinch, you can cast this for 5, and then later in the game, you can cast this for kind of as much as you want. At that point, the limiter is how many cards are left in your deck.
Yes.
Like when you have 12 mana, you don't want to draw 9 cards usually. But when you have like 10 mana, you could certainly stand to draw 7 some of the time. And if you have to scale it back, drawing 5 on a stalemate is going to be good enough.
Right.
Also, part of the reason this card was so good and constructed is when you've drawn a bunch of cards, the thing you need most is time to play them, and the gaining of life will enable you to do that.
Give you that 1 turn buffer that you need to use up all that mana for sure.
Yeah.
Card's awesome. It's a little out of place here, right? Like it's a splash card or something in the green blue deck or whatever. But yeah, anytime I could cast it, I would cast it.
I do think if I first picked Sphinx's Rev, I'd be looking for Oasis Ritualist more than drafting blue-white, because I think that's just going to be a better way of going about the whole thing. I would give it an A, though. I do think it's a build-around that's actually worth going for.
Same. It's awesome. Yeah, game breaker.
And then lastly, we've got Perilous Vault, our colorless edition, 4-mana artifact. You can pay 5, tap it, and exile it to exile all non-land permanents.
Oh, this was a core set card, too. I remember this one.
Yeah, Andrew Brown won Grand Prix Denver playing this card in blue-black control. I'm not a real believer in Perilous Vault Unlimited. I never thought it was that good.
9 mana, but it's on the installment plan. Okay.
Yeah, so the thing is, the way wraths tend to work is you know, we even talked about this earlier. You look like you're off to a slow start. They play their third creature on an empty board, and you're like, Wrath of God or Anger of the Gods, Sweltering Suns, you know, I got them. Well, imagine that situation with Perilous Vault. You're like, Perilous Vault. And they're like, okay, attack you for 8.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
You're like, okay, next turn, Perilous Vault. And they're like, okay, well, I didn't add another creature to the board. And you're like, I like 4 life now.
Right. Well, and it also doesn't work out in your favor, because you go Perilous Vault, go, and they're like, crush you with it. And then you say go again. And then they go to combat. And you're like, okay, fine, I have to pop this vault because I don't want to take another 8. And then they're like, play a thing, go. Right. So you don't even get that window, you know, unless you're willing to take a heck of a lot of damage.
Yeah. And imagine the disaster scenario where they're like, all right, bounce your Perilous Vault, or, you know, destroy your Perilous Vault or something. It's just,
that's real bad.
So I think this card's like an F. No, it's not an F. It's like it's like a C-, because I could see there being slow decks where you're able to do something like, first of all, pay 9 to wipe the board.
Yeah.
That is a thing. And it kills non-land permanents. So against a deck that has maybe a build-around enchantment or artifact, it can do additional damage. And then I guess, imagine you're playing like a green deck and you play an Oasis Ritualist and another defensive creature and you play a Perilous Vault. Now maybe you've got them in a situation where they need to add more to get around your defensive stuff. And then you're just suckering them into to vaulting or to getting more advantage off Perilous Vault. I don't know that that's going to be very good, but it's like a C-. It's not a straight unplayable card. I think for the most part, though, you just shouldn't put this card in your deck. It's a card I don't think you're going to see much success with.
Yeah, I mean, if this format is, you know, has aggressive decks, you know, this type of card plummets. If it is very, very slow, then yeah, you can play Perilous Vault. It does things. It's
a good sideboard card for 2 control decks. Yes. I do think that because it's a unquestionable answer, and 2 control decks are much more likely to be jockeying for position and end up in a spot where one of them can just go vault, pop it, and then, you know, you don't think about sweepers all that much in control versus control.
No, and this is a super sweeper. Yeah,
it's colorless too.
Colorless, so like, exiles.
Your blue-green deck normally doesn't have access to this. Your opponent's not going to hold back.
Totally. Yeah, that's very good. Okay, so those are all of the new cards. The ones that weren't in either Amonkhet or Hour of Devastation before. But what about the underrated cards for the set?
Yeah, again, we don't know exactly how this is going to play out, but I do think that it's worth mentioning kind of some cards that were underrated when the formats were kind of current. Deserts in general were quite good.
Yes.
Like the cycling deserts. There's 1 for each color. It's an ETB tapped, land of that color. So like it just taps for a blue. And then you can pay 1 and a blue to cycle it. And there's a lot of cards that count deserts in play or in your graveyard so that you could cycle them without losing out on the bonus. And in general, all the cards that cared about deserts, you could, you could not reliably have them, but you could have them enough if you cared enough. And deserts themselves are underrated. Like, you should be looking to 3rd or 4th pick deserts of your colors.
You're talking about like Hush Up Oasis, Ifnir Deadlands, those type of cards?
No, just the cycling common deserts.
Oh, just the regular ones. I see.
If I've taken 2 blue cards or 3 blue cards and I see a Desert of the Mindful, the blue desert, I'm going to take it over most cards.
Yeah.
It's really strong to have like 2 or 3 cycling lands and play 17 or 18 lands.
It's really, it's very underrated, just that part of it, let alone the synergies. You're right. Yeah.
Yeah. You just end up not getting mana screwed because you have 18 lands.
Yeah.
And not getting mana flooded because you just get to cycle lands in the middle of the game. One of my favorites was Wall of Forgotten Pharaohs, a 2-mana 0/4 defender.
Oh, yeah.
But if you had a desert, I'm just going to say if you had a desert from now on, even though it counts graveyards too, you can tap it to deal 1 damage to target player or planeswalker. So this card ended up being a very strong card because a 2-mana 0/4 that kept their stuff at bay and started pinging them to death This card was just good.
You actually had to deal with it. It was so annoying. You actually had to use removal sometimes on their, card that they picked up 11th or 12th pick. That doesn't line up with the card that you picked second, very well for you. Yeah.
Sacred Cat was another one. 1 mana, 1/1 lifelink, and it had Embalm for 1 white, so you could basically flash it back for 1 white. This card ended up being a kind of a workhorse. It just did exactly enough in the various like decks that had auras or decks that had sacrifice stuff or whatever. Like even in the zombie decks, because whenever you embalm something, it comes back as a zombie. So
yeah,
you had some cool stuff going on with this card. It looks really dorky, but it's actually pretty good.
It's actually pretty dorky.
I really liked Countervailing Winds. This is a 2 and a blue. It's an instant. It counter target spell unless its controller pays 1 for each card in your graveyard. So note that it doesn't count itself. But what would often happen is if you had this in your opener, you could just cycle a card or play a removal spell early, and then Countervailing Winds their 3 or 4 drop depending on who's on the play. But it also has cycling too. So a cycling card, which could be a good counter early, and is also basically a hard counter late. When you had 8 cards in your graveyard, this is just a hard counter. Meant that this card was both flexible, powerful, and had cycling, so you got to get out of it. It was a good card. It was not one of the top 5 commons or anything, but it was a card that I was always happy to play multiples of in my decks. Yeah. Good cyclers are just really good. It's more the point.
Yeah, it was easy to dismiss too, right? It was easy, like, oh, it's some weird counter that's too flat, but it actually did its thing.
Another really good one, the Tarmogoyf, Vile Manifestation, is 1 and a black for an 0/4. It's a horror. It's an uncommon. It has +1/+0 for each card of cycling in your graveyard, and it has cycling too. In the heavy cycling decks, this is a 2 mana 5/4.
I remember this card.
The whole thing going on where if you attack this as a 3/4 into their 4/4, sometimes they'd be, or more likely into their 2/4, right? Their Oasis Ritualist. They just wouldn't block because you could just cycle 1 card and kill their thing for free. And it had cycling itself. So if it wasn't going to be good, you could just cash it in.
Right. I remember that.
The beatdown decks had a couple kind of unassuming cards that ended up being pretty strong. Bloodlust Insider was one of them. 1 mana, 1/1, taps to give a creature haste. When your opponent led a mountain Bloodlust Insider, I always felt like I was going to lose.
I always felt like it was either going to go really well or really poorly.
Well, part of the reason this is an underrated card is that a lot of people didn't know this was good. So when someone cast this card, it usually meant they either really knew what they're doing or really didn't.
Exactly.
The people in like the middle, like 60%, just dismissed the card because it looks so bad. But the people at the very top end were like, no, this card's actually good because I know how to construct my deck and I know that it's going to do its part. Or there's people who just love all 1-drops and maybe didn't have a great deck otherwise.
Yeah. I can't remember how I came down on it at the end, but I think I just hated the card all the way through. Like, I think I was never impressed by it. Yeah, it's definitely not my kind of card, but sometimes I come around on cards that aren't my kind of card, and I think this one was just junk. At least that's what my recollection is, but I can't remember.
Well, that's why it's underrated. Pathmaker Initiate's another one. 1 and a red for a 2/1, and you can tap it to give a creature with power 2 or less unblockable. So basically, it's a 2 mana 2/1 that if the coast is clear, you can attack, or you can just attack and trade for a 2-drop. That's all fine. And then later in the game, it basically was tapped to deal 2 to your opponent as long as you had another creature out.
Yeah.
So it's also pretty cute with saboteurs. There's a couple creatures that have like when they hit the opponent, do something cool, and Pathmaker Initiate was a good combo with those. One of the best finishers, another really good white finisher, was Overwhelming Splendor.
Yeah.
This is a 6 white, 8 mana. It's a aura curse and it enchants a player. So it's got this huge imposing bolus art too.
Yeah.
You put this on your opponent, and creatures enchanted player controls lose all abilities and become 1/1s.
Yeah.
So shrinks all their creatures to nothing, and enchanted player can't activate abilities that aren't mana abilities or loyalty abilities. So their lands can still tap for mana, and they can still activate their planeswalkers, but they can't activate anything else. It basically turns off all their artifacts, any enchantments that have an activated ability. Like it really nukes a lot of what they can do. This was basically 8 mana win the game.
It was. As long as you weren't at 1 life or something, it basically just ended it. Yeah.
And this is the kind of card that if you have if you first pick Overwhelming Splendor, you better believe you want the Ritualist. Mm-hmm. When you're able to go Oasis Ritualist and then turn 6, tap it for 2 white mana, tap your 6 lands, slam this. A lot of times your opponents are just going to die. Yep. They're going to get to hit you for 3 damage with their 3/1/1s next turn, and then they can't win the game after that.
That's right. And it is funny how this is the type of card that makes your opponent kind of want to just pick up their library and look through their deck and go like, I don't like all my cards are 1/1s. Like this is all I'm going to be able to do. And you're like, yeah.
And then the last card I want to talk about was Abandoned Sarcophagus. It's a 3-mana artifact at rare, and it says you may cast spells that have a cycling ability from your graveyard. So anything you cycle, you can cast out of your graveyard. And if a card has a cycling ability that would be put in your graveyard from anywhere and it wasn't cycled, exile it. So basically what this means is you can cycle cards into your graveyard, then cast them out of your graveyard. So all of your cycling cards net you a cycling draw plus their original effect. For example, if you have Horror of the Broken Lands, you can cycle it, then cast it.
Yep.
If you have any of these cycling cards, you can cycle it, then cast it. And then it also kind of looks backwards where imagine you draw this in the middle of the game and you have 5 cyclers in your graveyard. Well, you get to start casting those too. It was a really cool cycling build around, and it ended up being really rewarding when you got like something like 8 or 9 cyclers. It wasn't a card for every deck, of course, but I remember this card going pretty late when it was actually a pretty strong engine once you got it together.
Yeah. This brings up, speaking of 3-mana artifacts, it looks like they have the monuments back in here. These are not underrated, but in fact, the opposite in most scenarios. They were overrated and pretty bad. They reduced the cost of spells of the color of each monument. There's one for each color, and then they give you a benefit, but they were basically never worth it. I had a few cards that I pulled out here just as kind of sweet ones or, to get you pumped up for the format or something like that. A couple of kind of really splashy, fun ones. I would not call these under or overrated necessarily.
We're just supposed to talk about the cards you like.
I just want to talk about the cards I like, dang it.
Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. So the first one was Sandworm Convergence. This is the one that I was like, oh yeah, Sandworm Convergence, 6 green enchantment. Creatures with flying can't attack you or planeswalkers you control. And at the beginning of your end step, you get a 5/5 green worm creature token. So you pay 8 mana. The flyers can't hit you, and you get a free 5/5 every turn, and you get one that turn. It's at the beginning of your end step. So right away, you have a 5/5 on the ground, which is going to make it hard for them to attack. And of course, every turn that goes by, it gets harder and harder. I love that card. It just floods the board with those for huge mana. River Hoopoe is the GOAT. It's my favorite card from the format. I mentioned it earlier. The gods, they're here, right? So I mentioned them briefly as far as finding answers for them. But if you've ever wanted to play, the Scarab God in limited, well, he's here. So have fun. They are on the short list of most absolutely broken mythics they've ever printed for limited. And you're not going to be happy when they're on the other side of the battlefield, but if you have one, it's pretty great.
If you want to get pedantic, Scarab God is the best of them, but
yes,
they're all effectively unbeatable.
Yeah.
The only way to really beat the gods are to have one of the relatively few exile effects or a counterspell, or just be in such a board position where you can bounce or kill it once, which is the same as bouncing it, and maybe kill them. But your drafts were on easy mode when you opened one of the gods. They were all just so absurdly ridiculous.
They really are. And as Louis said, the Scarab God's the best. But I mean, play the Locust God. You won't be disappointed. Next is God Pharaoh's Gift, which is a card I had to learn a hard lesson on the pre-release for because I had misread it. But it's 7 mana for an artifact. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you may exile a creature card from your graveyard. If you do, you get a token that's a copy of it, except for it's a 4/4 black zombie that gains haste until end of turn. And that's the end of the text. When I first read it, I just assumed that it got exiled at the end of that turn, and it just doesn't. You just get to keep the card. So it is amazing. If you see your opponent making trades for your creatures that just don't seem advantageous for them, they probably have God Pharaoh's Gift, and they're just stocking their graveyard with them. But again, I've already got an 8 mana and now a 7 mana payoff here. You can see that they gave us big toys to play with, but they also gave you the ability to actually cast them. And Godfarrow's Gift is one of the better cards for sure.
It's not like rares dictate the entire format, but there's a reason we've mentioned the words Oasis Ritualist like 15 times.
Yes.
All of these cards are just absurd when you get to cast them 2 turns ahead of schedule and don't care about the mana costs.
That's right.
It's just something to think about.
So think of those, a couple of the split cards that are, there's, what do they call these? I can't remember, but
Aftermath.
Yeah, Aftermath cards. And there's there's a bunch of them that are very strong.
I mean, I will say that the shorthand is the Aftermath cards are basically all great. There's a couple exceptions, but those are the exceptions more than the rule. The ability to just have both cards. This isn't like you choose which half you want to cast like Fire Ice. You just get both. Mm-hmm. And they tend to be very, very strong.
That's right. And you have to do them in the, so you get to cast the top half at, whatever speed it can be cast. And then the Aftermath one gets cast from your graveyard, but you get both. A couple that stand out is just like, geez, these things are insane. At rare is Cut to Ribbons. Cut is 1 in a red sorcery. It does 4 damage to target creature. So 2 mana for 4 damage. Obviously you're way ahead in that exchange. And then Ribbons can actually just end the game. It's black X for the Aftermath. Each opponent loses X life. So you kill their creature and then you just sit on Ribbons for some number of turns until the time is right when they're at 5 or 6 and you just kill them. So that's one of the really strong ones. You
want to hear another genius or grifter involving Cut to Ribbons?
I do. Yes, definitely.
Well, a close friend of mine was playing in a pro tour, and his opponent, who is in the MPL now, but we'll be naming names here, just enough to get a little salacious, little part of it in, was basically dead and goes, tap all my mana, flashback Ribbons, and looks at my friend expectantly, and my friend's like, okay, it resolves. I go to 1. They're like, okay, and they scoop.
That's the like PTQ grinder play of like do something with a lot of confidence so that you hope that your opponent just assumes they lost and they scoop or whatever.
Yeah, wow. Yep. Apparently it was.
Hey, good for your friend. Don't fall for that one. Another one of the really amazing Aftermath cards is Grind to Dust. So Grind is 1 in a black sorcery. Put a -1/-1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures. So it's the same as the whatever it's called, the common that we had on there, except for it's 2 mana but sorcery speed. And then Dust is 3 in a white. Exile any number of target creatures that have a -1/-1 counter or have -1/-1 counters on them. So, you're going to get the 2 creatures that you cast Grind on, but you might even pick up something else because they kind of float around. Mouth to Feed. Now, this one is not on the same level, but I love this card.
This was just your favorite card, the entire block.
Yeah, it was. I have a, what's it called? I have, what is it Artist Proof? Is that the one where it's white on the back? Yeah, I have an artist proof of Mouth to Feed that's signed by the artist. His name's Zach, and whatever. I'm not even going to bother reading the card. You get a 3/3, but it's just a fun card for me. Greatest Sandworm we mentioned. This is one that took a little bit of learning. Speaking of the split cards, it took playing with it once or twice, or playing against it once to kind of like figure out what it did.
I don't exactly agree.
Okay, what do you think?
I think it took exactly once.
Exactly once, exactly.
I agree. I agree that this card was underrated until someone saw it cast. But then once you saw its effect happen once, you're like, oh wait, no, never mind. This card's just obscene.
Yeah, and this happened on the show, by the way, where we were like, we gave it like an okay grade, and then we came back, we're like, never mind A. It's Insult to Injury. So Insult is 2 in a red sorcery. Damage can't be prevented this turn, which is probably why we already didn't give it the great, an A or whatever, because you're like, if you're starting off with damage can't be prevented this turn, it's like, I'm not that interested. But it says if a source you control would deal damage this turn, it deals double that damage instead. And you're like, okay, that's kind of cool. Injury is 2 in a red sorcery also. It's Aftermath, of course. It says it does 2 damage, so read it as 4 damage if you've cast Insult this turn, to target creature, and 2 damage to target player or planeswalker. So again, 4 damage so it does 4 damage to a creature, 4 damage to a player if you can go insult and then cast injury if you get up 6 mana. You take away their best blocker and then you just attack with all your creatures. And it's like, it doesn't even matter what you have, because if you get in for, 5 or 6, it becomes 10 or 12 and they already took 4 this turn. It's not hard to figure out that that's going to be a game winner once you see it happen.
Think about it this way. You have 2 3/3s, they have 2 4/4s. Mm-hmm. If you go insult to injury, cast them both in the same turn, you then kill a 4/4, attack with both. They trade for a 3/3, and then they take an additional 6. So
they
the
take
net
10
result
for the turn
is you traded 2 for 2, and they took 10, and you traded up on your 3/3 to their 4/4.
That's right.
Now you can imagine a board where it gets much worse for them than that. Yes, this card was an A.
Yeah, total A. And then the last card that I wanted to highlight, just because it's a sweet build around, or at least it can be, is Drake Haven, which is kind of one of the seeded build arounds for this set, or for this type of set. It's a 2 and a blue for an enchantment. It's rare. Whenever you cycle or discard a card, you may pay 1. If you do, you get a 2/2 flyer. So pretty sweet. Lots of cool stuff in the set for sure. I'm actually pretty stoked for it. Luis, we never did our Crack-a-Pack.
Oh, we didn't. But before that, since we're talking about Amonkhet, I have a great story about Drake Haven. It feels appropriate for this episode.
Okay, yeah, bust it out.
So Travis Wu made a video once. He's made a lot of wild videos, and his video was how to defeat Paulo Vitor Damarosa. That was the title of this video. And this video is one of the most absurd videos I've ever seen. But step 1 was be in Paulo's draft pod.
Okay.
So that was step 1, because this actually happened. Step 2 was pass him be to his right, pass him a Drake Haven, then cut off cycling. Because that's what Travis did at this Pro Tour.
That is ridiculous.
And the steps get like progressively stranger from there. It was really something. But every time I see Drake Haven, I think of this video, and I'm like, it might be true that this would be effective, but this is going to happen exactly once lifetime.
Right. Yeah. This isn't a good guide, right? All right. Well, let's do the Crack-a-Pack real quick before we head out here. And now that we've kind of gone over the format, we can dive into one. So our first card is Horror of the Broken Lands. So we talked about that card. That's a perfectly fine one to open up here. Next is Aven of Enduring Hope, which we also, I think, talked about, or did we not? I think we did.
That was one of the better white commons for control, though, obviously.
Yeah.
Not the place I'd want to start out. I would much rather start with Horror of the Broken Lands.
Right. The Aven is the 4 and a white 3/3 flyer. When it ATBs, you gain 3 life. Next is Ornery Kudu. This was kind of a funny one. It's 2 and a green for a 3/4. So crush the vanilla test. It's an antelope. And when it enters the battlefield, put a -1/-1 counter on target creature you control. So if it's all by its lonesome, it's a 2/3, but you could throw it on some utility creature and get in with a 3/4.
Yeah, this card was fine. It wasn't amazing, but it had some utility.
Bloodlust Insider, unplayable.
Oh, yeah, we're snapping that off.
Next is Kenra Scrapper. We mentioned that one too. That's a 2 and a red 2/3 with Menace, and you can exert it to give it +2/+0. Very strong card.
I think I'm still in Horror of the Broken Lands at this point.
Same, yeah. Next is Winds of Rebuke. This is 1 and a blue instant. Return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. Each player. Oh, look, it says Mills 2 cards now. That's cool.
Yeah, nice. Updated text.
Yeah. Fine. You can put it in your blue deck, but it's nowhere near what we've seen here. Floodwaters. It ended up being too slow somehow. Not what you want to be doing in the format, but it's 4 blue sorcery. Return up to 2 target creatures to their owner's hands. It also has cycling for 2. Basically, this card is just cycling 2. This type of format really didn't let itself to the Floodwaters type stuff. I guess blue-red would be the one place where you might. But next is Seeker of Insight, 1 and a blue for a 1/3. You can tap it to draw a card and then discard a card, but you can only activate the ability if you cast a non-creature spell this turn. Restriction ended up being a little much for Seeker of Insight, but again, it's a card you could put into your deck if you needed. Haze of Pollen is 1 and a green instant, prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn. It has cycling for 3. No, thank you. Feral Prowler, 1 and a green for a 1/3, and when it dies, you draw a card. I love cards like that, but again, first pick item is not really where you want to be. So that brings us to the uncommons. Our first one is Appeal to Authority. So
yeah,
if you just want to push in on green-white, you could go for it. Generally speaking, I think that better off with green white, since it really isn't drafted very heavily, to try to pick up your appeal to authorities later when no other deck wants them, but it's the best card in your deck. That was kind of the upside of the green white archetype, was exactly that.
Really, like, I think the person more likely to draft green white is not the person opening this pack, us, because I wouldn't first pick appeal to authority here. It's the person like 4 or so seats to our left,
right,
where they're going to get a 4th or 5th pick appeal to authority and kind of correctly, kind of figure out that, well, green white might be open, especially if they led with a couple white cards. Like, imagine you go like, pick 1 compulsory rest, pick 2 gust walker, pick 3 Ronus' stalwart, and pick 4 there's an appeal to authority. Perfect. Yep. Or even 3 white cards in a row. Then this is like, hey, this is a reason to find my second color.
Yeah, that's much more likely. People never really first picked appeal to authority.
No, I would still take Horror of the Broken Lands over appeal to authority. Pick 1, pack 1.
Same. Next is Crocodile of the Crossing, 3 and a green, 5/4 with haste. Yeah, that's a lot. When it enters the battlefield, you put a -1/-1 counter on a target creature you control. Card was good.
Yeah, it's by itself 4 mana, 4/3 haste is already pretty big, and then often you can put the counter. I mean, there's a reason that the Naga Vitalist, the mana dork, was a 1/2. I think it was so it could absorb counters. When you led on that into Crocodile turn 3, put the counter on the Naga, that was pretty good. I think I like Croc here. It was a little bit awkward in the sense that the green ramp decks weren't really in the market for this, but it was such an intrinsically good card that they would still just play it.
Yeah, I would take the Crocodile here. Although now we have Baleful Amonkhet next, which is 2 and a green for a 4/3 lifelink. By the way, this is also a Crocodile. It's also a demon. But when it enters the battlefield, you guessed it, put a -1/-1 counter on target creature you control. We actually picked up 3 of these somehow in this pack.
Yeah.
But this guy was good.
I think I prefer Croc of the Crossing, but they were pretty close.
I like the Amonkhet myself. I just like black. I mean, green is, I think, the best color, but I like to
that's kind of where. So green's the best color, but black is not too far behind. And Baleful Amonkhet is a little better for black decks than Croc is for green decks. I think I'd still just take the Croc, but honestly, these are basically tied for me.
Very, very close. And then our rare Anointed Procession, 3 and a white enchantment at rare. If an effect would create 1 or more tokens under your control, it creates twice that many tokens instead. So this is for the dreamers out there, right? This is for the people who are like, I can do it. It's going to happen. The card actually had some pretty cool like implications in the set, but if you're looking to win, it cannot be correct to take it here, unfortunately.
No. It was good with Embalm, and it was good with, like, I guess actually just Embalm. I don't think there was really much other token making. I guess the white cartouche made tokens, but for the most part, you're looking to Embalm here. I think that Baleful Amonkhet or Crocodile of the Crossing should be your picks here.
That's where I would end up too. I'd take a Crocodile, and you can pick which one you want. All right. Well, hopefully this I will call it a new set, ends up being awesome. This is a really cool take. I think that if I remember correctly, they had put out Amonkhet on Arena originally, but then when they switched over to like some different type of rules engine thing or something, it didn't like come along with that or something. It was in the like closed
alpha.
Is that what it was?
It was never a like real public facing thing. Like obviously people knew about it, but like the first time I saw Arena, I remember it had Amonkhet on it, but it was pretty different than it did. It was a kind of a almost not a prototype exactly, but a pretty close thing. So not surprising to me that they would bring that back. It feels like maybe a lot of that work was already done. Hopefully they didn't have to redo it all. But if they did, who knows? It's here, and we get to benefit from it.
Yeah.
On the other hand, they also get to sell packs of an old set where they don't have to put new R&D resources onto it. So there is that too.
They're getting their
value.
Smart move.
In that sense.
No doubt. But yeah, hopefully it ends up being, hey, look, to me, if it's like a souped up version of Amonkhet with Hour, I'm happy with that. That is a fine flashback format and a format that I ended up liking a lot. I did not like original Amonkhet very much. I thought it was just fine, but Amonkhet with Hour was really great. And I think that, if we get that here, and hopefully the seeded kind of historic cards don't ruin it. There's already a lot of freaking great mythics just from Amonkhet and Hour. Now it's like I have to play around Wrath of God somehow. Like that's kind of a lot, but hopefully it's super fun. And let us know. Of course, I know that some of you have already done so, but let us know what kind of decks are winning for you and what seems to be good in the format.
Yeah, if you want to hear me and BK's take on what it's going to do to constructed historic, that was our episode of Constructed Resources this week. So you can check that out by going to channelfireball.com, and also post all the episodes on my Twitter. It's on all the major podcast networks as well.
Oh, I have you muted on Twitter, so I don't see those, but
I know that's a lie, actually. So,
dang it! How did you know? I mean, it is a lie, but how do you know that? Because I reply to you sometimes.
Frequently to what I say.
I do. I blew my own cover there. If you want to find us on social media, by the way, I'm Marshall_LR and Luis is LSV. This show is brought to you every week by channelfireball.com. Make sure that you use the affiliate code LR if you buy anything from them. That shows them that shows us support and also shows Channel Fireball why they're here with us over on LR. Also, you can go to channelfireball.com/ubox, we buy. If you've got a whole bunch of cards and you're looking to just get rid of them, you don't want to go through all the hassle, just put them in that box. You can go to that website link and it'll tell you, and they'll sort them out and give you an offer, and you can get those cards out of your closet if that's where they've been accumulating. You can find everything related to this show on lrcast.com. That has links for everything. Luis's stream, stuff that we do outside of LR specifically. And in fact, Luis, that reminds me, let's put a CR link, where they can see like the shows on there so that people can find it there.
Sounds good to me.
And then, every episode of the show ever, is up on lrcast.com, and, you can
except
go back
for the one,
No, they're all there. I swear, they're all there.
No, I know, except for the one.
All right. Well, how about we let our listeners find the one that's not on there?
The forbidden episode.
That's right. That is going to do it for the show this week. Thank you so much for hanging out, and we'll see you next time.
So, Marshall, I'm thinking about starting a new podcast now that we're on the subject.
Dude, stop! You can't keep doing this. You're gonna be spread too thin. You're gonna lose it.
Yeah, it's going to be called Fall Guys Resources. I don't know if you've heard of Fall Guys by now.
Fall Guys? No.
It's actually a new game. It came out about a couple weeks ago. It's going to be the game of the year. It's insanely popular. It's number one on Twitch, like the day it came out. It's kind of like a battle royale game where you start with 60 people and your goal is to get to the end of like a race with all the other, and you'd be in like the top 40.
Okay.
And then it basically has 25 different little like mini games. Some are races, some are endurance things, like you're on a spinning platform with a bar trying to knock you off, and you try to be one of the last people. Mm-hmm. There's team games, like there's a soccer game, and it's a really fun game. It's not your speed. I know I'm not really selling you on this, but if any listeners haven't tried Fall Guys, it's a game on Steam, and it's incredibly fun. So I want to share a couple tips for people looking to get better, because it's a pretty low barrier to entry. I tried playing Fortnite and I bounced. I was too bad at it. It wasn't fun. I could never, like, at no point could I even come close to killing someone. It was just ridiculous. It was like it was like if someone who's only played limited gets handed a vintage deck or something, and you're like, well, this isn't going to be that fun. Right. But it's actually worse than that, because you could still win a game. Like if I handed you a vintage deck out of nowhere, Marshall, you could put together a way to win a game. You're good enough at Magic to do that.
I did. That exact thing happened. You handed me a deck and I played against, maybe I won't put him on blast, but he's a person very close to you right now, physically probably. And I won.
That'd be Raptor, yes.
Yeah, that's right. I beat Raptor.
He's literally 40 feet away from me.
I knew it. Yeah, Ocho handed me my first vintage experience, and I'm like, "Does this win?" And Raptor's like, "Come on!" And Ocho just laughed because it did.
But anyway, but Fall Guys is a pretty fun game to play with your friends, and it's a game that I think that there's a couple easy tips that will really increase your likelihood of surviving. The number one is just be patient. The levels that I think most people struggle with are ones where it looks like a race, in the sense that you want to be one of the first 30 or 40 people across the finish line, but really you don't have to go just completely balls to the wall at all points. Mm-hmm. A lot of the obstacles actually reward you kind of being patient, picking your spots, wait for the thing to rotate so you have a better jump, all that sort of thing. That's just like the number one tip. You'll get better at doing that. The other is for some of the team events, it's not about you winning, because most of the team events in the game, there's 3 teams, and the last team gets eliminated, or there's 4 teams and the last team gets eliminated. So a lot of the times what's actually better for you is picking on the team that's doing worst, because your goal is just to be not last. So in some of the team events, focus less on scoring yourself and more on making sure that the last place team loses. And then the other is actually just kind of do a little bit of research. I got better when I kind of looked at what some of the the tricks people were using on various levels, and some of the obstacles actually got quite a bit easier when I did that. While we're on the subject of game reviews, I have one more great game that just came out that's also really fun. It's called Among Us, and this might actually be more your speed. It's a kind of werewolf style game where it's got a great setting. You're all on a spaceship and you're trying to find the imposter.
Oh,
or if there's enough
cool.
people, there's 2 imposters. And so how the game is structured is you all start out on a ship, and what you should do is you should play this over like Discord with a bunch of people. You don't talk except during the meetings because it would be way too easy otherwise.
Is this a structured game? Like, can I buy this, or is this just
you can. It's only $5 on Steam.
Oh, so, it's a Steam game. Okay,
it's a Steam game. So what happens is, let's say you're playing with like 6 people or 7 people, and there's one imposter. Everyone has a certain amount of tasks to complete. So yours could be like fix the navigation, and go plug in the reactor and whatever. They're just tasks that take you around parts of the ship, so you have to move around. And if the crew finishes all their tasks, they win. Like they get the ship into complete readiness, they win. Or if they figure out who the imposter is and airlock them, throw them out of the airlock during one of the meetings, they win. The imposter gets to run around the ship pretending like they're a crew. You don't know who it is. Everyone looks like crew members, but they're trying to like kill people. Ideally, they kill people when they're alone, because if someone else sees you, then you go to a meeting and there's 2 people saying, you're the imposter. No, you're the imposter.
Oh, right. But one of them actually saw, so yeah.
It's usually easier to tell who's lying. People just aren't that good at that, direct confrontation.
They're terrible.
The way the imposters tend to win is they kill someone, the body's discovered, a meeting's called, but maybe the crew gets the scent wrong and accuses the wrong person, airlocks an innocent person, and then the imposter's able to kill enough people that they win.
You get airlocked if you get voted off the island or whatever.
Yeah, it's great. It's really good flavor. The game's really well done.
It's amazing.
We had a really funny game yesterday where we were playing, and me and Ben Whites were the imposters. And
okay, so there was enough people for 2 imposters.
Right. There's 10 people. And we call a meeting, and Raptor's like, I saw BK coming. He left right before we discovered the body, and he took a very suspicious route. He went to this area, then to this area. And BK's like, no, that's just the area my tasks were in. That's why I did that. And Raptor's like, no, that doesn't. You took a circuitous route. BK is definitely an imposter. And it was so perfect for us because what happened is everyone voted off BK, and then it shows you that he's not. It's like BK was not the imposter. And so the next meeting, Raptor immediately got airlocked because he looked so suspicious because he tried so hard to convince everyone BK was the imposter. So me and Ben White's won easily because then we just managed to once 2 innocent people get airlocked, it's really hard for the good guys to win.
But Raptor was just wrong. That was
just wrong.
Okay,
he just thought BK was doing something suspicious and he wasn't. Actually, BK got railroaded another time.
This is great. Can we just make BK gets railroaded resources? Like, I'm really enjoying this.
That's the new podcast.
Yeah.
Imposters have a special ability to make them a little stronger, which is that they can climb through the vents of the ship. And only they can do that.
I see.
So they can travel faster to kind of make up for the fact that there's usually 1 or 2 of them and like 8 crew. So I said, I saw BK coming out of a vent. And so everyone's like, yeah, he's the imposter. Only imposters can do that. And BK's like, what are you talking about? I didn't come out of a vent. I'm like, no, I saw him come out of a vent. And BK's like, you're just lying. And then we threw him off the ship and he was the imposter. And he was so mad because he didn't come out of a vent. He like actually didn't. I just got it wrong. So it was a classic like blind person throwing a dart at a dartboard where I got my facts completely wrong, but I was right.
Oh man, I actually thought you were gonna say that you just decided to just ranch PK and just get him off the ship.
It was amazing. So
that's even better.
He was so mad because he didn't screw up, and I like had him dead to rights, but I didn't actually, but I was still right. So yeah, Among Us and Fall Guys, 2 truly excellent games that I would highly recommend if you're looking for something other than Magic. Also, BK is usually the imposter.